The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed in the podcast belong solely to the hosts and not the host's past, present, or future employers. Hello, everybody. Welcome back. It's Brian and Mr. Betcher for Breaking Down Security.
What's up?
Not much. I think the ice finally melted here. We got some weird rain and snow shower ice pellet stuff here, and weather's just been really weird the last couple of weeks. It's probably nice down in Austin, I'm guessing.
Well, lately it's been really wet, cloudy, and cold.
Oh, weird.
Yeah.
You don't
kind of like Seattle weather.
Yeah, I was going to say, you don't live here, but
yeah.
it's wow, okay. Yeah, the one thing I did like about Texas was it was like cold. What do you consider cold? Let's see.
50.
Oh, okay. You sweet kid. You're a sweet kid. Oh my God. And of course, I'm like, oh, it's in the 30s here, and Alaska's like, hold my beer. Wait for this. I got friends in Fairbanks that are telling me it's like minus 30 in the shade and whatever. I'm like, oh my God. That's Fahrenheit for you non-U.S. people. So it's close to negative 40 Celsius as well. So this we have an interview this week. We also have we're mixing it up a little bit. We're doing a little bit of news. Miss Berlin, of course, you haven't heard her dulcet tones. She's not here because when we recorded this, she was at the SE Village. She'll be back next week. Yes, I believe next week.
Oh, is that SE convention?
Is it Layer 8? Is that the SE Village?
I don't know.
Let me see. You know what? I think you might.
It's in Florida, right?
No, that's the one at DEF CON. I have no idea.
Okay.
Maybe it was Layer 8 Con. Let me go look. Our interview person is like, oh my God, what are they doing? Please let me go. Sign up for this. Anyway, so no, it's not that one either. So just you heard his snickering of yes, you are correct, Brian. Taylor Mutch is on the show. If you don't know Taylor, a little background for all of you folks who live in the Seattle area, you might have seen him at our meetup at CIS East last 2 months ago. He was one of our featured speakers, and he spoke about application security items, and we got to talking afterwards, and he's like, oh yeah, I got this tool that we're using to interrogate our GCP environment. So I was like, hey, that sounds like a great show. So we finally got him on, and we're going to talk about it. So Taylor, welcome to the show.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Right on. Why don't you tell people a little bit about yourself, other than that you do application security? How did you get into information security, or do you do information security? Is it a 4-letter word for you? What is it? How are you doing that?
Oh, I wear a lot of hats. So currently, I'm actually working as a site reliability engineer, but I have also worked with infrastructure security, application security at Unity, which is where I work. And there's a lot of things I do, administrating GCP and AWS environments, working a lot in Kubernetes, doing a lot of DevOps-y-like things. Ooh. Sometimes we throw around the word SRE. And then we also throw around doing incident management for, stuff that breaks or security incidents, stuff like that.
Wait a minute. So sorry, I don't mean to get on a tangent. You said incident management. What's the difference between it and incident response? Is this an incident that's currently in situ, or, are you the one causing it and you're managing the incident?
Sometimes we could be responsible, but more often than not, it's actually... So as part of the site reliability engineering side of things, we do a lot of incident management where a service is coming down, and then we actually receive the alert, see if we can triage it, get the service back up, and if we're unsuccessful, we'll escalate it to service owners. And that can come in the form of, service or, application is misbehaving, or there's actually some sort of weird business impact. So it might not be that the application is misbehaving, but it's actually something wrong with code logic. So we handle all sorts of different scenarios, including security incidents. So yeah, that's a little bit of that.
That's very cool. Okay. And how long have you been doing site reliability engineering, SRE, and information security?
I've been doing that coming up on 2 years.
Okay.
So I'm relatively new to the game, but it's been exciting so far.
Fantastic. Well, we're glad to know that there are people like yourself out there that are helping to make us look good. So, so I said we're starting out a little odd. I found a news article that kind of dovetails well into what we're talking about here. It's from Tech Republic, and it's called let me see, Security Concerns Hampering Adoption of Containers in Kubernetes. And they cite a study from a company called StackRox about security incidents and deployments in the last year. And they state that a very high number of security incidents led to the delay or outright halting of application deployment into production. And the idea is that people are either scared of using Kubernetes or they don't understand it. There's, all kinds of issues there. They sampled 540 IT professionals, and they say security is they say that security has become a high priority as customers seek to deploy containers or Kubernetes applications in productions. I would argue it should have always been. It's not just becoming, but you work a lot with containers and Kubernetes. What is your thoughts about this? Did when you were first starting working at Unity, were they already doing deployments using containers and Kubernetes?
Yeah, so like when I started there about 2.5 years ago, we were already doing containers, but we weren't doing it very well. We were actually, one of the things we ended up doing is actually using a managed platform like Google Kubernetes Engine and GCP. Before that, we were actually running our own Kubernetes clusters, and we did not do a very good job of segmenting workloads between different node pools. Mm-hmm. So you get a container running, basic web application facing the internet next to another container on the same host, which is running, customer sensitive data processing. So very easy, if the application is, gets popped, then it's very easy to just, especially if with people who don't understand how Kubernetes networking works, but if the attacker knows what they're doing, super, super easy to exfiltrate data, and then it's game over.
Right. According to the article, they say exposures due to misconfigurations were the most pertinent security risk for their container and Kubernetes environments. Of the, 540 odd IT people, they said 60% of the respondents cited misconfigurations as their main concern, with another one telling vulnerabilities. So I don't see the difference here, misconfiguration and vulnerability. Misconfigurations are vulnerabilities in their environment, but that's just me. I'm just, nitpicking at things. But so they said even seasoned developers have difficulties managing containers in Kubernetes. Would you agree with that?
I totally agree. Absolutely, 100%.
What is it? Is it the complexity of it? Is it just, that it's so foreign to what they've been doing before? I mean, it seems like these things would be fairly easy to set up. I mean, it's just a little bitty, container. Well, it's not a little bitty. I mean, there's size is irrelevant. But, I mean, how hard is it to screw this up? I mean, we've had, Ian Coldwater and Jay Beal on before, but, I mean, you can set different sizes for your cubes, right?
I mean, you can set by cubes, you mean the actual Kubernetes clusters?
Right.
Yeah. So it's, if you're not using a managed service, and I, for one, I'm lucky and I get to use managed services, but if you don't, I think it's really easy to misconfigure your clusters such that you schedule your workloads incorrectly. That to me is the number one problem. And I also see the other problem being understanding that Kubernetes essentially treats everything as an object. Your container is an object. Your service and how you structure it is is an object. But I think some people don't quite get that. They're just, my container, it runs on this host. It's just a process running on it. That's true. But there's this kind of in-between layer, logic layer, that I think a lot of people just don't quite understand or know that it's a thing, especially for application developers who if you're in the scenario where you're a developer and then you hand it to another person to deploy it, you're removed from that process. You don't understand what it is, how your stuff is running in your environment. That's actually something that's kind of a mentality change that we started to do at Unity, where the service owners, the application developers, are also responsible for running their infrastructure. That's kind of something lucky we get out of using managed services, but that's a luxury and not always the case.
Right.
Well, I can see where they're getting these numbers, because it says right here that in the article, 81% of companies says that they put security concerns totally in DevOps hands. So developers were in charge of security, right?
Right.
So if you don't train developers in security, then they're going to make mistakes. It's kind of like when firewalls first came out, right? People put them up and they really didn't know how to configure them because they were really brand new, right? So same thing with containers, I believe.
Well,
yeah, and
no, go ahead, Tim.
yeah, like the firewalls, like container native firewalls, are starting to become a thing that are like, it's a whole nother world. It's but it's still networking. It's a network firewall, but it's still foreign to a lot of people, it seems.
Right. Why would you use a firewall in a container environment? Isn't that a virtualized firewall? Don't they? I mean, cubes don't have kernels, right? That's what I'm understanding. They run on top of the kernels, right?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, it's just it's just Docker running on top of the host. Right. So there's nothing crazy there. But yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, yeah, it's going to be a virtual firewall. So probably ways around that, or if you've misconfigured that.
Well, I was thinking because, containers or small VMs have Linux kernel, which normally has like IP tables, embedded in it. You just need to run that. But Kubernetes, you don't always have that capability. So Mr. Betcher brings up a good point. He's like, the security people just kind of let the DevOps folks install Kubernetes, but nobody was minding the store. So, the DevOps folks did not have guidelines or anybody to follow. I would imagine that's how it's working, where they just said, oh yeah, we're going to go ahead and do what we want. And the security people are like, wait, we don't know how to secure that. And they're like, no, DevOps, it's all good. And, because there's no security in DevOps because it's not DevSecOps. So I don't know if that's the case everywhere. And I apologize if you're a DevOps shop and whatever. But it sounds like that there's misconfigurations. There's issues with vulnerabilities because, one, you've got to keep up on your Kubernetes environment. It's constantly changing, as we heard with for me and Coldwater. There's major changes between like versions 108 and I think it's up to 118, 119 now, something like that. But to help you with that, and this story dovetailed very nicely into why we had Taylor on this week, he has a tool, and
yes,
it will be open sourced fairly soon.
Very soon.
We're waiting for an email and a button click, and it'll be open sourced. That's what he told us before. How
easy is that?
I know, right? It's the easy button. Actually, it's a literal easy button. Which can you tell me which email you're waiting for and from whom? Is it like your director of operations, or is it Brandon, or who?
Just waiting on an email from IP legal.
Oh, okay. Oh, fucking lawyers. Okay. Oh, I mean, good lawyers, happy lawyers, safe lawyers.
Yes. Everything will be just fine.
Yes, precious. Maybe you didn't bring them enough candy or something today. Maybe she had brought them some very healthy foods. They would have been okay with that. Anyway, so you have a tool that will be open source soon, and it's got a cool name. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what it is all about?
Yeah, so I have this tool. It's called Nemesis, and the shortest explanation I think I can give it is that it is a tool for measuring against a set of compliance rules. Specifically at the moment, Nemesis is a tool that is specifically measuring against the GCP CIS benchmark. But in the future, I would love to see it be expanded to other cloud platforms. And I think there's a specific need that needs to be satisfied in the world of Kubernetes, especially for Kubernetes in managed environments. I think there's a lot of other tools out there that already exist for non-managed services, but I think that if there's something that could do managed services a little bit better for Kubernetes, because I think for teams that can use managed Kubernetes, I think they should, because that kind of helps alleviate some of those misconfiguration problems right out of the gate.
Okay.
So anyway, so Nemesis is a little tool that we ended up writing. We wanted to basically do these measurements really quickly. And all of the tools that we found, we were trying tools like Inspec that were going very slowly, and we needed to iterate across multiple GCP projects in the numbers of like 500 instead of just 5. So we wrote this tool last year, and we kind of working on it every now and then to give it some updates. And yeah, so that's Nemesis in a nutshell.
Work?
So it is a CLI tool, but that you can also run it in a Docker environment. So you run it, you give it some commands, give it some credentials to look at your GCP environment, and it will actually go and make requests against all of your different GCP resources. So these could be virtual machines, this could be storage buckets, and especially GKE clusters. And takes the set of rules that are defined in the CIS benchmark and measures against the API response. So it says, this Kubernetes cluster by default has these IAM permissions, and the CIS benchmark, it says that it should have only these at a max.
Did you custom write those inputs, or does CIS publish some sort of JSON rules or whatnot?
So we ended up having to essentially pull all of the commands from the CIS benchmark. So the GCP publishes their CIS benchmark for the cloud platform, or I guess CIS publishes it. And we reinterpreted all of the commands. They actually provide all the commands and the expected input and output. And then we converted those to their API responses. So rather than having to type a bunch of gcloud commands, gcloud's their tool to do that, we just use the Golang APIs directly. Nemesis is written in Go. And we essentially were able to replicate the same responses and then confirm that we were matching against that same specification.
Cool. How did you come up with the name, other than it being the name of one of the worst Star Trek movies that was ever made? How did you come up with that name?
It definitely wasn't anything to do with that Star Trek movie.
Oh, we don't talk about that.
At the time, we were trying to come up with tools. This was like GCP checker, something boring. My colleagues and I at the time, we were actually playing Magic the Gathering a lot together.
Okay.
And I think Nemesis is one of the box sets that came out a while back, like quite a while ago. And so I said, that sounds like a cool name for a tool.
Nice. Okay. I've heard worse. So, it's awesome. That's pretty good. So I have I noticed, and I don't know if this is how it works with the current versions or, this particular CIS benchmark, but there are XML files that are created for, to be used, and you can create custom XML for, I believe it's their Syscat tool, but did you look at the XML files that they had, or did you have access to those?
We did not have access to those.
Okay.
And yeah, we were really wanting to kind of go as lightweight as possible, and we wanted to we don't use the CIS benchmark, religiously. We don't follow it to the T, but we do, use their scoring as a rough benchmark, or as a rough score to see like how well we're doing. Mm-hmm. But there are, for example, we didn't implement the, it's currently, it's an open issue once it gets published. we didn't implement any of the Cloud SQL benchmark. There's just a whole section that's not there. And then we didn't implement, there's some things around public IPs and private IPs, but we know that if you secure your stuff right, like even if your instance has a public IP, it may not even be able to receive traffic.
Mm-hmm.
So there are things like that where, you know, we need a public IP for a VM to be able to egress out and like get packages and stuff, maybe.
Okay.
But if it can't ingress, like we don't really care.
Yeah. So in what way is you can use your tool anywhere, or is there a specific place that it can be used? I mean, is this a tool that only works under certain conditions?
The only conditions are that you need to be able to authenticate to Google Cloud, whether that's using their normal OAuth flow or having a credential file that you have downloaded. You can use it with a service account. You can use it as your user credential. So normally when we were testing this, we were running it from our laptops and just querying Google directly. But we also ran Nemesis. We run Nemesis as a cron job. So you can stick it in. It's just a Go binary, so it's super easy to put it into a Docker container, and then you can run that Docker container Kubernetes. You can run it on your laptop, wherever. Give it the credential file that it needs somehow. And then it also currently supports outputting to PubSub. So for every measurement, you can get a message in your PubSub queue, and then stick that into some data store for you to process later. Maybe send an alert if it's of a type of misconfiguration that you would deem critical or worthy of alerting on. That
Right.
would be something that's possible to do today.
Okay. So we talked a little bit before we started recording that I had certain issues with the CIS benchmarks. One of the ones that I had was historically with Linux, that some of the ones just didn't make sense. Some of the commands were no longer applicable. Some of the hardening, and I'm using quotey fingers when I say that, is not really hardening, and it actually caused the operating system to be far less secure. One of the biggest issues I had, especially with running things like containers or VMs, was you must have a separate slice for your var temp folder and your /temp folder and all these other things. And I was like, look, in VMs or in containers or something, you're not going to be separating out your slices in those things because you're just going to blow those away. Did you find any issues with implementing a lot of the command line items that you found in there?
Yeah, so some of the things around, they've got some silly things in there, like you must use our product for logging and monitoring. Most people who are, seasoned Kubernetes people know how to get their logging and monitoring in there. So if you're running like an Elk stack in the cluster, or you've got Prometheus in there to get monitoring, you probably don't need to be using the GCP stack driver logging monitoring.
Okay.
That's I think on the benchmark it's not scored, but who knows what auditor is going to say, oh, you don't have this enabled,
right.
Why are you not doing that? It's like we have a better solution that works better for us. So there's like little things like that. I think I touched on a little bit. There was instances with public or private IPs. If you've got the correct firewalls in place or correct configurations for everything, it's not going to be an issue. And that one is scored. So I think that one's essentially, we looked at these as the CIS benchmarks as inspiration, not as a hard, it is not something that needs to be followed explicitly.
Right. And you mentioned scored and not scored. What's the difference between those?
I mean, that's definitely up to interpretation. For Nemesis, it doesn't care. I think it might say whether or not it says the CIS benchmark says it's scored or not, but it doesn't use that information. It doesn't use that information at all for determining severity of a misconfiguration or not. It's just metadata.
Right. Okay. There's a level 1 and level 2. Did you automatically try to shoot for level 2 on everything, or was that too stringent to create or to maintain?
We implemented as much of the level 2 stuff as possible. I think a lot of the level 2 stuff, we started to look at it and say, this doesn't really make sense, or it's actually going to end up breaking our environment. I think there was a specific one I was looking at. So for example, in every VM in GCP, like the CIS benchmark says, you must have OS logout, which is another GCP specific feature. You can't use OS login on Kubernetes nodes in GKE. It's not supported. And if they tried to enforce that on us, and with all of our stuff, if some auditor came in and said, you have to have this enabled, and we say, we literally can't because GCP says not. So there's an immediate contradiction there in the CIS benchmark. That one was just silly.
Does it score, or does it just give a list of things that aren't compliant?
It does not do score. It just gives you, here's a specific resource. Here are the checks that were made against it, and whether or not it passed those checks. It does not do a score on each individual asset. It will just say whether or not it passed certain things, and then we'll highlight which ones it didn't pass.
Okay.
All right.
So you mentioned several times auditors that come in. I'm assuming because you're a company, you get audited for things like SOC 2 perhaps, or whatever.
Yes.
How do you explain to an auditor your environment? Are auditors getting smarter about what Kubernetes and containers and VMs and all that or are you still having to walk them through with cubes for dummies or something like that to help them understand what exactly that is? And it's not a physical hard drive, or it's not a physical computer, and it's not in a data center that you can go and touch. I mean, what is the landscape like for that?
I think it's I don't have too much experience with auditors directly, but I think my interpretation or my understanding has been that it's been a learning curve. I think the first learning curve was just people were moving their VMs to the cloud, and now they're starting to do more interesting things that aren't, it's not as easy to explain if you don't have the technical background.
Right.
So I think it's going to be one of those things where it's going to just take some time for people to get up to speed, but it might take longer just because it's more complicated.
Yeah, I was just wondering maybe if, and I should have asked if you had any, if you actually talk to the auditors, because some folks don't, but I was just wondering how we educate folks on that. So how would you best explain to a layman what Kubernetes is if they'd never seen it before, or if they're still unsure as to how that works?
Yeah, so I think there was a really cute little gopher graphic that kind of explained it, with someone helming a ship. The way I think I could best explain Kubernetes is you have this, depending on the layman, like if they're not if they know what a computer is, it's a computer that has a bunch of mini computers on it, but there's basically a master at the helm of the ship that's determining where all these things go. So, maybe they're going to move these literal containers over here into a larger ship because they need more space. They're just bigger containers. Mm-hmm. It's really, I think Kubernetes is really good at figuring out how to make your workloads fit in the space that it has, and then also complaining to you when it doesn't have the right requirements. So like if someone, builds a container that uses a lot of memory and my nodes just don't have capacity for it, it's just going to say, I don't have room for this.
Okay. Very cool. Yeah, I there's an illustrated children's guide to Kubernetes, which is about 8 minutes long, on online. Captain Cube, Goldie the Gopher, and Fippy the Giraffe. So there's a link in the show notes if you want to try to explain to your auditors what that is. There's a nice 8-minute video on how to do that. Mr. Betcher, you two have a lot in common, actually. He works on trying to prevent misconfigurations and shoring up networks, and you work on configuring certain things for logging. Did Nemesis also set up logging, or does it do anything else other than check for misconfigurations? Or how are you using this in the environment the way you have it?
So Nemesis is entirely a read-only thing. So it does not actually go and make any changes to the environment.
Okay.
The way you could use it today is you could include it in a CI pipeline for checking the state of a GCP project, or you can target specific resources. You can also use it just kind of as like casting a wide net to see what is the current state of my entire organization in GCP. So for example, you could use it to pick up new projects that you didn't see the last time you did your scan, maybe do a check against ones that were deleted, maybe it shouldn't have been deleted. You can also do a check just against different networks, see if people are, maybe there's something weird going on in a project and you're not really sure why. You can, if you've run this scan a bunch of times over the course of, every 5 minutes for 2 days, you maybe can pick up a pattern and see if there's something weird going on.
Okay. Well, so why would you not want Nemesis to make those changes? Would it cause undesired operation potentially? Is it something that you'd be like, okay, you can implement this, but this might actually cause some problems. Because I use a little background. When I was in the Navy, we had things called the gold discs. And what it would be is, back in the day, we had CDs, which are compact discs for all you young kids out there that don't know what they are. You put them into the computer and it would harden the box for you by double clicking on an exe file. And it would basically just either run a bunch of patches or it would make a bunch of registry changes to the system, and then you'd reboot and you'd be up to a DISA standard. The problem was, if you ran it on some system that was already operational, it would brick the box. You'd lose access to the domain and all this other fun stuff. And thankfully, we didn't run it on both domain controllers at the same time. We only ran it on one. And when it bricked the domain controller, then we knew not to run it on the other one. Is that the same case here? It's like, oh, yeah, I could make all the changes for you, but it might actually completely blow up your entire environment. Is that what we're looking at here?
Yes, I think it's a very similar thing. Like, if we enforce a lot of the things that it currently checks for, like specifically against the CIS benchmark, most of the stuff that we have running today probably would not function. A lot of the, I think this is a good one for Kubernetes for GKE. By default, it wants you to use OAuth scopes, which are deprecated in GKE. It actually wants you to use IAM directly. And if we followed that directly, we would break a lot of connections to some of the other managed services that we use in GCP. So it would basically restrict the VMs from being able to talk to, Google Cloud Storage. And we have a lot of things that depend on just being able to read from block storage. And that's just, for the business, it's just not something that we can do. So we made a choice not to enforce that, but instead talk to service owners, talk to people running that infrastructure, give them the results of the data, and then let them, decide, whether or not they want to make those changes or not, or change how they're doing so that they can be doing things in a more best practice manner.
Okay. Is there any warnings when you run it to say, hey, what? Sorry, not warnings, because you already said it wasn't going to make changes. But let me erase that. We'll worry about that later. What's the technical level of somebody? Can you just download? You can download Nemesis and just run it, but if they don't know what they're doing, they could just haphazardly make these changes. What's the technical level needed to be able to successfully run your tool? Is there a knowledge level that's required?
I'd say it's actually pretty low. The code is very specifically meant to run in a read-only way. Like it doesn't make any delete requests against or even updates.
Okay.
If it fails to pick up a resource, it will just silently pass by. I think it throws a warning if it can't read something. I could check that later. But yeah, so I'd say it's pretty low. So if you say I'm new to GCP and I just kind of want to see what's going on in my environment, yeah, you'd be able to run it. There's a couple of commands just to make sure that you filter against the right project name, and just run it. And then you can output the results right there in your terminal.
Cool. All right. Very nice. So you do one thing and you do it. I haven't used it, but I would argue, I would assume it's doing it very well. What's the pipeline look for, additional changes to this? You said before the show you would like to actually be able to add some things to it once you've done this. Are you looking at making some kind of modular change where you could add plugins and run, on your AWS environment, or, you've got containers all over the place that aren't Kubernetes, so it'll actually import or do other things there? What are you looking at?
Yeah, so for now, I think it's, one of the biggest changes that I would love to see is making it modular, so that instead of, because right now it's pretty much hard coded against CIS benchmarks. I would love to see that go away and make it modular, so it actually loads in a set of configuration rules. For now, I think it makes sense to keep it specific to different cloud platforms. But one of the things I would love to be able to see it do is also have a Kubernetes client. You say, okay, my stuff runs in a managed Kubernetes cluster, but I also want to check different things in my Kubernetes environment, and maybe there are things in Kubernetes and in the larger environment that I need to kind of shore up against. So I think if it could do, if we could change it to be able to check things against the Kubernetes API, do compliance checks, or just general hardening, that'd be really cool.
Nice.
Yeah, I would love to see that happen.
Okay. What's the reporting look like? Because Mr. Betcher, his LogMD has outputs for reporting as well. Do you have a fancy CSV or a PDF that you could use, or does it have some kind of nice markdown format where you can show an auditor, look, I did this thing and here's all the things?
No, it does not it does not currently have that kind of reporting. Right now, it would output JSON or YAML. But you could then take that, and do whatever you want with it.
Hey, we learned about YAML last week. I'm putting my thumb out, but last week when we interviewed Roberto Rodriguez on tax simulation, he talked about YAML files too. So that's pretty cool. Oh God. All right. Anyway, so Mr. Betcher, do you have any questions for Taylor? Because I think we've pretty much exhausted all of my questions. So.
Well, I wanted to point out main reason you don't want to make changes is, you don't want to be responsible and people point the finger at your tool,
right,
destroying their company, right? So, you kind of have to make it a point to, we had someone come to us and say, and this happened several times, do you have some sort of an agreement that says what the rules are as far as making changes, or who's responsible or whatever? What's the it was like you needed to hire a lawyer to go through all the things that you would and wouldn't do to their company, and then we would have to read a bunch of stuff and say that our product wouldn't do X, Y, and Z based on their company policies. It's like, hey, you can use it or not. It doesn't make any changes. It's just giving you some more information on what your system is doing. Right. So yeah, you kind of want to stay away from all that, and that gets you out of the liability aspect of it.
Yeah. I can imagine, you you would run the tool and it would tell you, hey, you're not doing this, but if you did implement this, it may cause undesired operation. So
you leave it to them. They're the experts on their own environment,
right?
Hopefully,
right.
And let them make the decision based on their company's needs.
Yep. So historically, and I only come from the world of Windows and Linux on my CIS benchmarks. Kubernetes is fast. The new product stuff and features that they add it seems to me that CIS benchmarks would become fairly outdated fairly quickly, depending on whatever has been added or what new features have been added or removed. Have you seen that in the time that you've been working with Nemesis and the CIS benchmarks, how things have become outdated or no longer available?
I think for Nemesis, with regards to GCP, yes, there are things that are already out of date. I think with respect to Kubernetes, I don't think CIS is going to be reliable enough and to be able to, make changes fast enough. I think there's a lot of work in the Kubernetes community to make, there's these ideas of operators within the cluster that kind of make things standardized.
Right.
And that is a pattern I think it's going to be a good thing, because you can also include an operator that ensures that you don't have certain configurations going into the Kubernetes API. So and a good example would be, pretty basic one, and that's making sure that all your deployments have resource limits set. If you have an application that's deployed and it doesn't have resource limits, you're gonna and the application starts getting tons and tons and tons more requests and using up stuff, or maybe it's suffering from a DDoS attack.
Right.
If you had resource limits, you'd be getting warnings that all your containers were dying way sooner than you would if you didn't have resource limits.
Right.
So I think go ahead.
Because of the how fast everything moves, does your system look to see what version they're running and then only run certain findings or only certain benchmarks against theirs? Or is it like, you're far too old, you need to update your GK before you even run this?
I don't think that's actually in the benchmark for regards to Kubernetes version, but it does not do that today. Okay. That would be a cool thing that I'd like to see, because I think anything older than, like, I don't know, there's a bunch of findings recently that are against older versions of the Kubernetes API that we should be checking against that, but we're just not today. Okay. That would be something I'd love to see as part of like a Kubernetes plugin to this. Yeah, and be able to make those checks.
Cool. I was thinking, because you were mentioning trying to make it more modular, maybe you could create like a JSON blob that you could import and then run everything against that, and that would be something that everybody would have access, or like you said, a YAML file or something that would allow you to, import that, or, make changes or go beyond the CIS benchmarks. We have, CIS plus, that kind of thing, or, whatever best practices that aren't in Kubernetes, or, because it's a moving target, you could say, well, we want to make sure we're looking for these things or these, and perhaps maybe the CIS maintainers will, take a look at that and be able to import that back in. When you finally do open source it, assuming the filthy lawyers get back to you, what's this licensed under? Is it under GPL, BSD, MIT, open source? What kind of open source license are we looking at?
I think we're looking at Apache 2 at the moment.
Okay.
So that's kind of where we're at right now. I also am trying to see if I can maybe do MIT.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which would be the 2-clause BSD license, I believe. Yeah. Why Apache 2? Is that just because that's what Unity uses, or is that just one that you like?
It's one that was recommended to me from Unity.
Okay. That's fair.
Normally, when I do stuff that's not Unity related, I usually just do MIT.
Okay. Very nice. All right. Mr. Betcher, any questions from you?
No, I'm just looking up. Doesn't Mozilla have one as well? Have you looked at that?
Yeah, the MPL, the Mozilla Public License. Yeah, I think it's some sort of variation of the GPL. Oh my God, I'm sorry. Yes, I apologize for you MPL folks out there. Yeah, I'm sure there's some specific issues there. And really, it's almost like a religious war. It's like which one is the best license to use or what have you. So there's all the different kinds. LibreOffice, I think, uses MPL. So it's really just preference. Some people enjoy using the BSD licenses. I grew up on the BSD 3 and 2 clause licenses. So, yeah. Taylor, before we go, how would people get a hold of you if they wanted to discuss Nemesis? Will Nemesis be in a GitHub repo, or where are you planning on posting that if you're going to do it?
It will be on a GitHub repo. And throwing an issue there in the GitHub will probably be one of the quickest ways to get a hold of me.
Okay.
With regards to Nemesis, I think I also have my email on my GitHub profile. My GitHub profile is just Taylor Mutch, capital T, capital M.
Okay.
And yeah, I think my email's there as well. So cool. Easy to get a hold of me there too.
All right. Excellent. GitHub.com/Taylor Mutch. Cool. There you go. All right. So keep a lookout in the next few days. Taylor will definitely let us know, and I'll tweet that out if you're interested in that. Yeah. So you're on Twitter, I assume.
I am one of those crazy people that's not actually.
Have we ever had anybody who's not on Twitter on our show?
No.
Wow. Okay. All right. Are you on Mastodon?
You're the winner.
Yeah. You win the prize for something.
Twitter is one of those things that I'm probably going to be adding here pretty soon.
Yes, because all the cool people are there, like me.
I know.
I'm cool, maybe. Mr. Betcher's definitely cool.
I've never used Facebook, so.
Oh, wow. Well,
now you're lucky.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, okay. So Taylor will be on there shortly, but I'll definitely make sure I tweet it out to everybody. I could definitely see this being used as a security configuration or a security tool, period. I know my friend Mr. Jay Beal, who will be speaking at CSEC East on the 4th, might be interested in talking with you. So I'm glad you're going to be there. We'll see each other at CSEC East on the 4th. If you are in the Seattle area and you want to come and meet Taylor, he'll be making an appearance there, hopefully, along with Jay Beal, who will be talking about Kubernetes security. And he actually asked if he could come on the show in the next month or so. And I was like, yes. Why did you even bother asking? Just assume you're going to show up one night. We'll just, start recording. So you're not on Twitter, but your GitHub is there. Okay. Are you speaking anywhere? Did you try out for B-Side Seattle at all?
No, to be honest, I'm pretty new to the whole area. So I'm definitely learning a lot of things, but I'm gonna try to ramp up a little bit, but so stay tuned.
Cool. Don't you worry. We'll get you hooked up. Don't you worry. You stick with me and we'll, make some noise. Cool. All right. Well, Mr. Betcher, let's go ahead and get this over with. And how would we get a hold of you, and what all cool things are you doing?
Yeah, I'm just working on, aside from my day job, LogMD.
Right.
You can check it out at log-md.com, or my Twitter is at Betcherpwned, BOETTCHERPWNED.
Right on. Ms. Berlin, of course, doing a lot of stuff herself, doing some tabletops at NolaCon. I don't know if she still has tickets available for that, but last time I heard, NolaCon was giving out that training. It's InfoSec detection and disruption. Oh God, I screwed that up. Let me go see what it's about here. Let me see. Detect and defense. So it's detect and defense, kind of like it's a role-playing game that she's doing as a tabletop exercise. So if you go to nolacon.com/training/2020/security-detect and defense, you can get a ticket if possible. So I do know that she's going to be giving that at multiple places. And it's a good time. A lot of people have a lot of good positive feedback from that. And if you're interested in asking her more about the Detect in Defense tabletops or her nonprofit, Hackers Health, and or just herself, you can follow her on Twitter at Infosister, INFOSYSTIR. Hackers Health is the Twitter, and I believe it's I can't remember what the D&D one is, the Detect in Defense. But she has it on her Twitter. You can always go and find that. We have a Slack on Brakesec, very active Slack, very active community, a lot going on there. Our book club is starting on the 20th. Well, it started, because by the time we see this, will be about the second weekend. We're doing the AWS Pen Test on Hands book by Ben Cottle and which one? I forget whoever the other gentleman who wrote it. It's Spencer Gilbert and Cottle. That's the two authors' last names. So grab the book. You can come and join us Mondays at 10 p.m. Eastern or 7 p.m. Pacific. And we do have a European, Middle East, Asia group, EMEA group, who meets on Saturday mornings U.S. time, if that's more your deal. JB, one of our moderators there, runs that version. And we're on Pandora, Spotify, Stitcher, TuneIn Radio, or pretty much everywhere you can find us. Please leave feedback, because those platforms thrive on highlighting and showcasing people. So if you find value in this discussion today, you can please leave us some feedback. We'd appreciate it. I have a TeePub store if you want to go get t-shirts or anything, mugs, stickers, whatever you'd like. Go to teepublic.com/user/bds.podcast. And I want to say that's it. Oh, thank you to our patrons. All the money goes to hosting fees, goes to helping out with time and effort, building community, and getting the podcast out on a weekly basis. So I appreciate that. I think that was it. Oh, no. Brakesec is the Twitter handle, Brakesec, and then myself, Brian Brake, on Twitter. You can follow me there. So I think that's it for this week. Mr. Betcher, it's always a pleasure, sir. Thank you. And Taylor, always thank you for coming on. Very effective speaking at Unity. I was very impressed by your discussion of AppSec. We're definitely going to need to have you back on in the near future to talk about all things application security, especially from that bent, because people tend to like that stuff, and I don't think do enough of it on here. So I appreciate you coming on, taking the time.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This was fun.
Right on. All right, well, that's it. Have a great week. Be kind to one another and take care of yourself, because you're the only you have. And we'll talk to you again soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye.